Good afternoon. I'm Angela Price, Project and Policy Director for Policy and Project Manager for Salt Lake City Housing and Neighborhood Development Division. I'm joined here this afternoon for a live AMA panel with People's Legal Aid Society, the Utah Apartment Association, Utah Community Action, and Utah Housing Coalition for an Ask Me Anything on eviction assistant resources. We're going to be on hand for the next hour to share information, helpful tips, and answer your questions. Our panelists will provide information on how to help avoid evictions and what to do if you do get evicted. Info will be available for landlords on tools to offer tenants for assistance and to help avoid evictions for non-payment of rent due to COVID-19. I'd real quickly like to introduce our panelists that we have here today. Paul Smith, the Executive Director of the Utah Apartment Association, Tara Rollins, the Executive Director of the Utah Housing Coalition, Heather Lester, Landlord Tenant Mediator, Utah Community Action, Jeff Daybell, Executive Director of People's Legal Aid Society. We also are joined by Representative Kurt Collimore from the Utah State Legislature and also an attorney here in Salt Lake City. Before we dive into your live questions, I just want to make a few remarks about Salt Lake City. Mayor Mendenhall and Salt Lake City Council recognize that Salt Lake City residents are facing unprecedented challenges due to the impacts of the coronavirus. Healthy, safe housing is crucial during the pandemic, and the city is committed to assisting Salt Lake City residents staying in their homes. Additionally, the city recognizes the economic impact and strain on our landlords. Salt Lake City, in conjunction with Salt Lake County and the state of Utah, are working to assist residents that are struggling to pay their rent or mortgage by leveraging partnerships with trusted community partners to provide assistance to our residents. To date, Salt Lake City has infused several $1 million into the community to stabilize housing needs, with more assistance slated in the coming months. These funds are available to eligible residents throughout Salt Lake City that may not have been able to access other assistance programs. We will be posting in the chat how you can access those resources if you are facing issues paying your rent or your mortgage or are facing eviction. With that, let's go ahead and start taking your questions. So our first question for our panelists, I'm going to direct this to each one of you, is can you please describe the eviction process? Let's start with Paul Smith with the Utah Apartment Association.
Thank you so much.
One second, sorry, Paul. Please, if you have questions, post them in the chat on Facebook Live, and we will get to answering those here in the next hour.
Thank you very much, and thank you for hosting this Ask Me Anything session today. So I just want to first start off this by saying evictions are not anyone's preferred thing to go through or to talk about. In fact, housing providers are not in the eviction business. We're in the housing business. So evictions are something that we hope that we never have to do. But if we do have to do them, the laws in Utah are very balanced and fair. They give tenants due process, but they also quickly allow landlords to get their property back and in many cases receive financial damages. So the first thing I would say before I describe the eviction process is if you are a tenant that is having housing instability, you're unable to pay your, you're unable to pay your rent, you need to quickly either solve that issue, and we'll talk about some of the resources hopefully later in the call that are available, or move, because you'd much rather find another way to pay or move than go through an eviction. So here's how the process works. First is you're served a 3-day notice from your landlord. It gives the amount that is owed and gives you 3 business or calendar days to resolve that. During that time, you should call 211. 211 is the state number for housing counselors. They can help you, hook you up with rental assistance and other resources. They can train you help you look at things you hadn't thought of, ways that you can pay your rent so you don't have to do an eviction. And they can help you hopefully find alternatives, move in with a friend or a family or go somewhere so that you don't have to violate that 3-day notice. You can be out by the 4th day or paid by the 4th day and not go through an eviction. But if you're still there on the 4th day, the landlord files an action in court. It typically takes about 3 weeks. The court will award triple rent or triple damages. So if it takes a month to get you out and your rent was $2,000, you'll actually owe $6,000. So I'll open it up for others to add on, but please avoid evictions if you can. Landlords hate to do them. It's really a last resort.
Thank you, Paul. Heather, do you want to talk about from Utah Community Action and your work as a landlord-tenant mediator, the eviction process?
Yes, eviction process, like Paul said, nobody wants to go through it. It's painful on both sides. As a mediator, I'm able to see both sides. And I mean, the eviction notice is what's given first. It's not filed with the court yet. I wanted to add that to what Paul had said. It's not filed with the court yet. It's a notice basically stating that you're in arrearage. There's an option to cure it. That's the pay or vacate, and then obviously the vacate option. But at the end of that 3-day pay or vacate, if it's not remedied, that's when the landlord does reserve the right to go and file it in the court with what comes next is the summons and the complaint, which starts the legal action against the tenant that has not moved or has not been able to fix it. So understanding as far as Utah Community Action, mediation does try very, very hard to get in front, to get upstream, if you will. Anybody that's talked to me for more than 10 minutes knows that I use upstream all the time. But upstream is where we're hoping to kind of make an impact, to empower people to pay those evictions, to find resources, to get in front of the court filings. And so that's the detrimental part, is the court filing. And that's what goes against your record. So the resources through Utah Community Action and many other agencies that were able to get funding, there's different pathways. We'll go into that a little bit in more detail throughout this call, but just understanding that there are rental assistance options, other heat options for utilities. We'll, like I said, go into that. 211 can also give those resources and be creative to help people get in front of that. But that's basically how the eviction process begins, is with that initial notice.
Great, thank you for sharing that, Heather. Jeff, do you want to talk about evictions and your work at People's Legal Aid Society?
Yeah, thanks. So just to add on, so the eviction process is really, you know, Paul and Heather both described it very well. I think the only thing that I would add on to those is at each stage of that, there are opportunities to speak with your landlord and to negotiate different types of settlements. Like Paul said, it's not the landlord's business to be evicting people. So if there's not other issues, it's likely that if we can get you into some sort of housing voucher or other resource that Heather talked about, it's possible that we are able to get you to stay and to be able to continue out your lease. One of the things that we do at People's Legal Aid is provide legal consultations. So if you get a 3-day notice to either pay your rent because you're behind or any other type of eviction notice, you can reach out to us and we can walk you through sort of your decisions. We work hand in hand with a bunch of our sort of sister agencies that are in the state to be able to get you other resources. If it hasn't progressed yet to a lawsuit, what we try to do is get you in touch with mediators and other people that can put resources behind you to be able to hopefully cure whatever issue you had listed in the eviction notice. We also work closely with Representative Colmore's office and the other landlord attorneys. So it's just better to reach out for help that as early as you can in this process so that we can start working on your behalf, because the entire eviction process happens, you know, in as short as 3 to 4 weeks. So as soon as we can get on your case and start assisting you, it's much easier to get a better resolution if we can get in there earlier.
Thank you, Jeff. Important points. Tara, do you want to speak about evictions from the Housing Coalition perspective, please?
Yes. I would just encourage, my encouragement is this. Day one, get help. Stop making phone calls. And as Heather has always said, and I don't know if I'm going to get this right, but the first day you're shocked, the second day you freeze, and the third day you kind of wake up. And by the third day, it's a little too late to, start navigating these systems. So on day one, when you get a notice, stop making phone calls. Dial 211 and ask for assistance on rent or mediation. And you really need to have a third party help you with this. If you feel confident, reach out to the landlord and start discussing ways that you can, become current on your rent.
Thank you, Tara. I think the takeaway that we've gotten here is communication early and often. There's assistance available, and reaching out to your landlord, letting them know that you're having financial hardships because potentially your hours have been cut or you're out of work due to COVID, and then seeking assistance by calling 211 is important. The next question we have is from Barbarella on Facebook, and it is, I help run the New Hope Neighborhood Center in Fair Park. We are facing eviction this week. It is not a residence, but we're not sure who to contact at the city for a hardship extension. Barbarella, I'm not sure about a hardship extension, but I do know that Salt Lake County has, along with Salt Lake City, have grants for businesses right now. The county has over $30 million available that can be used for rent, payroll, utilities. And so I would urge you to research the county grant, and maybe our folks here at the city can put a link to that on the Facebook chat. We also have, there are many programs coming out of the state of Utah right now that can help with assistance as well. For rent and utility costs. The next question that we have is from Amberly on Facebook. I want to know why they didn't just freeze rent and mortgage requirements and put landlords on the same assistance program for unemployment as everyone else during COVID. Let's see here. Trying to think of who best to direct that person to. I'm going to maybe go to, well, Paul, you just turned your mute off. So do you want to answer that one?
Well, all I will say is that trying to guess why politicians do anything is very dangerous and very difficult. But I can describe the concept of the bailout and the federal support was put money in the hands of the people who needed it. Don't put it directly in the businesses. So for instance, there was direct stimulus to individuals. There was unemployment, an additional $600 per week above and beyond normal unemployment. And what that money was supposed to do is go into the renters' hands so the renters could pay their rent. It really was not designed to go into the landlord's hands. Now, just so you know, Utah is the #1 state in the country on the percentage of people that are paying rent. We are top in the country in rent collection. Most people have more than enough money from unemployment, from federal stimulus, from their personal savings, from their ability to get a second job, from friends and family, from communities and churches, that we have 49% less evictions than normal. So some people would argue that the philosophy of putting money into the hands of the people who needed it has worked incredibly. I know that you can't make everybody happy, and some people would like everything suspended, but what they did has seemed to work so far. I can't tell you why they chose that over any other solution, but that I can kind of explain why they did it and how it's worked.
Thank you, Paul. Does anybody else have anything to add to that? No. I'll just add that there are resources available for landlords as well. And we urge landlords to contact their lenders to see if there's flexibility. Again, just the main takeaway here is if you're not able to pay your rent, if you're not able to pay your mortgage, whether you own your home, you're renting your home, maybe you have a duplex and you live there but are renting the basement, reach out to your lender early, often, communicate that you're not able to pay your rent or mortgage and see what assistance is available to you. Don't wait until your home is being foreclosed on or you have a 3-day pay or vacate on your door. On to the next question. This is from Rihanna on Facebook. I'm at Hawthorne House in the Avenues. After not taking questions concerning leases, ASPM very quickly sold the building and drafted the entire building eviction notices. I personally have never not paid rent. We were misled and are being evicted for no reason other than this company thinks renovation is a good idea in the middle of a pandemic. How do we hold this company accountable for this unethical action? So I think at the crux of this question here, is a property is being sold or being renovated, and what tools do tenants have for early lease terminations, and what tools do landlords have to be able to sell their property or renovate their property? So I'm going to start with Tara and Heather on this, and then have Paul chime in. Jeff, if you have anything to add.
So we've seen this in Salt Lake County. I've had like 4 different phone calls on this particular issue. And I think one of the biggest problems is the fact that the state preempts the ability to cities during a pandemic or state of emergency to do short time, ordinances to make sure that their community is stable. I'm aware of this particular issue, and it just makes me sad that, money means more than community. And I understand that properties are going to sell, but I think that during the foreclosure period back in 08, 09, that if somebody was living in a foreclosed property, they were able to live out their lease. If they didn't have a lease, they had a certain amount of time. And so it's hard for me to believe that this is happening, that people are being mass evicted. We have another situation in Centerville with 48 units. We had another one, we had 2 other ones in Midville. And because the vacancy rate is so low, these people are going to have a difficult time finding a place in such a quick manner.
Thanks, Tara. Heather, anything to add to that? Go to Paul or Jeff.
I will just say that there is such a thing as property rights. And while it's difficult to understand why someone in a pandemic would ask renters to leave, businesses do have some freedoms to make decisions like that. Would I do it? I don't know. Has it been a long-term plan? Perhaps. But the reality is we use the term mass eviction sometimes when what we're really talking about is just giving tenants notice to move. In the state of Utah, a landlord or a tenant, if you're on a 30-day lease, have the right to say, I'm sorry, I don't want to renew this in 30 days. So just like tenants can move anytime they want, if they have the flexibility of a month-to-month lease, landlords can do the same thing. They can renovate, they can sell, they can do different things. And sometimes it's inconvenient. And some people even throw around terms like heartless and inconsiderate in pandemics. But the reality is there is other rental units available. And I would just encourage you to don't cry over spilled milk. Understand that if you have a 30-day lease, you were vulnerable. And if you don't want to be vulnerable, sign a long-term lease, because landlords, whether they sell a property or not, have to honor long-term leases. So That's my recommendation, is if you're worried about being displaced, sign a long-term lease.
Okay, thank you, Paul. Heather, Jeff, do you guys have anything you'd like to add on that question?
I don't know if Jeff does on the long-term lease option, but I just wanted to add, when it comes down to normal times versus pandemic, I know that a lot of times people are comparing that, and it's difficult because a lot of these things that we're seeing now were happening prior. People end leases, tenants abandon leases, pay or vacates were happening, nuisances were happening. So these things were happening, and it's hard now because the shock value of how could this happen during a pandemic. So a lot of things that I do, landlord or tenant side, either one, being able to insert myself into the situation to try and get maybe rent paid, it's difficult. And one thing that I've noticed as an uptick though during this time is whether it's private landlords, but maybe it's property managers that are in different companies, but there is a lot of lease terminations, whether it's long-term leases, whether it's short-term month-to-month leases, whether the landlords can't pay their mortgages because of the hardship of maybe the tenant too. So I mean, there's a lot of things happening, but at a volume, I've truly seen a lot of lease terminations happening, selling the homes, potentially renovating apartment complexes. I don't know why these things are happening, but at the same time, as far as resources go, if you're able to get in, if you're able to try and figure out resources, whatever that may be, um, the the landlord does work really well in the instance that communication is happening from the beginning, from the middle part, from the end, after it's gone to court, prior to going to court. If there's possibility for arrearages, late fees, rent being paid, that's going to make the landlord whole. It's going to stabilize the situation for the tenant. It's better overall just to try and get that communication, even if it doesn't solve the whole situation. It can possibly or potentially deter a lease termination. And so, not every situation is the same. And I wish it was. It would be so much easier. But just understanding that these things are happening and lease terminations are occurring at just a higher rate. There's a lot of times both sides just aren't stable. You have anything, Jeff?
Yeah, I would just add that usually these sorts of lease termination eviction notices are, I mean, if they have a lease, the number of days that can be given to terminate the lease can be different, but it's going to be somewhere between 15 and 30 days notice. I would just advise you to be one of the first people to reach out to the landlord and to start looking for an additional place to live. One of the things that we see is people will get an eviction notice and not do anything about it until day 28 or 29. And at that point, there's not a lot of resources we can put behind you to help find a different place to stay. And, just to echo what Paul said, landlords just have a different set of rights, their property rights. Most tenants, what they have is a contractual right, and the landlords are protected under that contract to be able to buy and sell their properties and deal with their leases as it's stated in the lease and in state law. So I would just encourage you to be proactive as soon as you get the notice to start looking for resources and other places to stay. There's that old saying that, bad news doesn't get better with age. It's the same thing with an eviction notice. It's just better to be on top of things. And in a situation like this where the entire building's being sold or the complex, you have to just realize that all of your neighbors are also going to be looking for resources. So it's better to get ahead of it than to just wait for the court actions to start coming.
Thanks, Jeff. Paul, I'm going to put you on the spot here on an offshoot on that question. Does the Utah Apartment Association, on your website, or if somebody were to call the association, do you have a listing of available rental units, or if we have a 40 unit complex that is being renovated, could somebody call and say, hey, do you have some other ideas on places that we could live with you know, that kind of have this level of rent? Is that some sort of?
Well, that's a great question, and we would be happy to take calls, but generally, because things rent so quickly and we never know what is available and what isn't, the best way when you're looking is to use market sources like apartments.com, Rentler, KSL.com, the online sources. Another option is to drive around. Oftentimes, landlords place signs. And really, Jeff made such a good point. Jump on this quickly. Don't wait. Get things arranged early. You'd be surprised how fast places go, but if you were the first in line, you'd have got it. So don't be the third in line, or don't be the person who waits till day 30 to start looking. Get out there, get on this, and you will be able to find something.
Great, thank you, Paul. Another question from Facebook from Candace. The 211 info is complicated as a renter. Are there any fully online options for a renter to fill out? And the additional part of that question is, the 211 info is complicated for a renter and mostly guides to a phone appointment or in person. Are there any online options for someone to fill out for rental assistance? Heather, I'm going to shoot this one to you, knowing that you don't work for 211, but that you may be able to guide people to those assistance locations.
Yeah, thank you. There are, and especially with 211, there's a lot of resources than just Utah Community Action that they're referred to, but I don't know of a fully online option, especially with COVID. Before, it was all in person, exchanging of documents, emailing back and forth. With COVID, especially now, the phone appointments, the assessments, everything, you work with case management, funding, is done virtually. I know that through not just our agency, but several others, housing authorities. Yeah, most of the agencies right now are virtual. So that's probably as online as you're going to get. There's a lot of emailing back and forth. There are certain documents. The amount of requirements for funding and rental assistance have been decreased to kind of expedite what's happening and to get the money in the right places quicker. So that's happening. But as far as fully online, an online questionnaire, an online assessment, as far as my knowledge, I don't have any information on that right now. But again, virtual, it's still worth getting in there. Even if it's a little complicated, it could actually pay off. And as everybody else has said, early the better. Call, get the assessment, do the appointment, get in with the case manager, whatever agency you choose to use, early and often.
Tara, do you have anything to add to that?
Yes, this is, so the state reported to us, I think it was last week, that a majority of the applications that are moving forward are not complete. And so many of the renters are not having the right paperwork. They're not coming back to, to the things that they need to be doing. I really, encourage people to follow up on these applications, because you most likely will be eligible. And, the housing assistance is not just for tenants. I mean, yes, it benefits the tenants to stay there, but it also benefits the landlord so they can move forward in their business, making sure that maintenance is being done, making sure that their employees are being paid, management companies, et cetera. We need to make, this is a win-win situation, to keep people housed and to make sure that businesses are moving forward in, a safe manner. So I encourage people to make sure that they go back and fill these applications out.
Can I just reiterate what Tara just said? Tara just said, well, let me use an analogy. Sometimes we hear when we're out of work, our full-time job is finding a new job. And some tenants that are unable to pay their rent, your full-time job, your project needs to be getting rent assistance. So don't think that it's going to be as easy as going to the corner and putting your hand out or doing an email and everything's going to be solved. You have to fight for this. I'm frustrated, just like you, that life sometimes requires us to jump through hoops. But nonetheless, Tara's right. If you will jump through the hoops, if you'll get on this, if you'll call, if you'll continue to ask your caseworker, do you have everything you need? You will ultimately get funded. But some of us want life to be easy. And unfortunately, rental assistance is not easy. Put yourself in the situation of a landlord whose tenant's not paying. They wish they could go apply, but they can't. They have to patiently nudge and encourage the renter to call 211, to schedule online appointments, to submit paperwork after paperwork after paperwork. It's very frustrating, but it's a process. Jump through the hoops and make it happen.
Go ahead, Tara.
I have one more comment. There's a lot of people out there right now that are really struggling with this pandemic mentally. And if you are, reach out and get some help. Reach out to your friend and say, hey, can you hold my hand through this? Because there's been moments that I'm like, oh, including, I'm unfocused. So please ask for help. Ask for help if you need it. And there's plenty of, people out there that are willing to do that for you.
Thanks, Tara. And you bring up a good point, which I was going to kind of circle back to you guys on, is are there agencies that are able to help a tenant navigate filling out this paperwork? I think it's important, if you've filled it out, you've been denied, reapply, because the requirements are changing. There's different funding sources. So we encourage you to apply again, but also, are you guys aware of organizations that are helping tenants navigate even that paperwork process? Specifically maybe targeted at individuals that have language barriers, that could get that sort of assistance.
I'm actually looking at Heather. I think one of the things about getting help is the community action programs are the place to receive help filling these out. They're trained to work with people, as well as have available people that can help with language barriers. And so, this is a statewide issue, and we have statewide community action programs. But I think Heather could speak to it more eloquently.
Yes, community action obviously does a lot as far as not just rental assistance housing programs. There's a lot of other programs that go along with it. Of course, there's Head Start, there's HEAT, and multiple others. But the main thing is yes, there's language barriers. If we don't have, we take a lot of referrals from other agencies. I mean, Refugee Center, Housing Authority, we work really good as far as in tandem with the landlords that are in the eviction process. Apartment Association, obviously Jeff there with the People's Legal Aid. So the resources are there within community action, but then at the same time, we outsource a lot to help to find out if we don't know what the barriers may be with the paperwork. But I don't want it to get misunderstood, because when we talk about paperwork, especially now, before potentially there was more document gathering, perhaps there was a lot more requirements. Those grants, the old grants, are actually still there. They're refunded. They're mostly every year, if give or take a few. But especially with the COVID grants, it's simpler. There's not a huge online process. You have to do the intake, obviously. They ask you questions, determining the fact that, you do fit the requirements for COVID. Whether you're affected, you've had unemployment, you've had a reduction in your hours, whatever the qualifications may be, they're actually very streamlined now. So when we say paperwork, and I wanted to clarify this for sure, when we say paperwork or to help someone fill it out, it's not a long, extenuating process. So just know that now. It's an assessment that you're going to do. They're going to determine which grant qualifications you have. And again, like Tara said, there is very little barrier now to getting some assistance. So definitely call through. Definitely get that assessment done. Get that appointment. We're scheduling them sometimes even the same day of from the intakes that are being done. So we're ramping up our systems over the last month. The phone number for that, I'm sure that 211 can refer people over, but just the intake alone is what gets you into that case management process. Again, with the communication, this is kind of my little stake in the game. It's difficult. You're in crisis, your landlord's in crisis. Alone, being behind on rent and not knowing how to communicate that, mediation is a really good source for that, because technically I don't deal with anything that's not in crisis. If somebody called just to chat, it would be weird. So understanding that bringing someone in to actually have a conversation with the two parties is really what helps. Sometimes people can do it on their own. Other times people need someone to say, hey, I'm behind. I lost my job 2 months ago. My landlord doesn't like me. I kind of don't like them. Get mediation involved. It doesn't matter who likes who. Decrease the mobility from moving and avoiding an eviction, getting that money back in the landlord's pocket and stabilizing the situation. Legal representation is great as well. Mediation works with lawyers on both sides, landlord attorneys, plaintiff, if there's pro bono people, or even your own representing counsel. Just know that having that conversation, helping mediation can also assist not to get in so much to case management because it's not a window, but understanding that the process is there, community action is there with the resources, the money's been put in that situation to access it quick, and have that conversation to get something in place with the people, again, that you're afraid to have those conversations with. It's crucial, and it's detrimental to prevent mobility. I hope that made sense. That was a little bit long-winded, but you got my point.
No, that made sense, Heather. And I would just like to encourage our residents. There are many organizations that are assisting people through this pandemic. For example, Comunidades Unidas is able to help you navigate the SNAP program and rent assistance and different resources available. So I encourage you to reach out to 211, or if you have a relationship with a trusted organization. All of the organizations that are funded through Salt Lake City or through any housing and urban development, any HUD program, they have to have translation services. People understand that it's a stressful time, it's a scary time, and there's resources in the community that are here to help you. And so please reach out early and often. It's far, as Tara said, the first day you're kind of in shock, but if you can get on top of not being able to pay your rent early, it's going to end up saving you time and stress and money over the long haul. So you're not backing up unpaid rent on top of fees, on top of lawyer fees. So we encourage you to communicate early, often, and reach out for assistance so that you don't have that backing up. We have another question here from Facebook. This is from Rhiannon, and I apologize if I'm mispronouncing your name. We understand landlord property rights, but shouldn't we be thinking outside the box because we're in the middle of a pandemic? I'm going to give that one to Paul.
I think you're right. I think people should be more kind and more generous and more communicative than ever. And I just want to defend the landlord and the housing industry. They have been rock stars during this pandemic. In March, we encouraged our members to sit down with tenants and work out payment plans. And they did that. And in April, as you know, the government kicked in, did this unemployment, did this stimulus. The state has taken a few months, but we have now a total of $26 million in rental assistance, only $500,000 of which has been used. Only about 240,000 or 240 people have even taken advantage of that. So the good news is most people are paying rent. There is a lot of money going into renters' pockets from the government. There is a lot of rental assistance. And the way to help renters is not to hurt landlords, it's to help renters find a way to pay. Let me just take a minute and go over the 5 alternatives to eviction. First, if you can't pay your rent, you should look at your personal resources. Tap into your savings, get a second, get a third job, get a loan. Many landlords will take credit cards during this crisis. Second, if your personal resources are exhausted, reach out to your friends and family. Right now, of the 300,000 rental households in Utah, many of them are receiving assistance from friends and family. It's not wrong to do it. It's creative. It's thinking outside the box. Number three, churches and community organizations have a lot of money and are very kind and generous right now. Some types of congregations are offering 1 month free rental assistance to anyone within their borders, regardless of whether they're a member of that faith or not. So reach out. It's creative to reach out and ask community organizations and churches. Fourth, government. There are so much money coming from the government, including this rental assistance. Fifth, if you can't pay your rent, find someone to move in with. Move back home with mom, bunk up with a roommate that's also struggling. Find an alternative to an eviction. Again, the best way to help renters is to help them find a way to pay or to give them rental assistance. It's not to punish landlords or to make them lose their home or get a foreclosure or be unable to pay their bills or support themselves. Some people don't understand this, but in Utah, there are over 100,000 unique landlords or rental owners. Many of them are seniors that own 1 or 2 houses for retirement income. Others run businesses and they support large families. They support lots of employees. There's almost 20,000 employees in the property management industry. So thinking outside the box, being creative doesn't mean punishing landlords. It means helping renters. And that's what I encourage people to do.
Thank you for those suggestions, Paul. Heather, I see Jeff's hand up. Heather, you were unmuted. Did you have something you wanted to add there? Or? No? Okay. Go ahead, Jeff.
Thanks. I never want to cut Heather off because she's a wealth of information. But so in my position, we deal mostly with the tenants and renters here in Utah. And it is a different perspective for sure coming from the tenant side. It's difficult to get additional jobs. We've seen that a lot of those additional jobs would be in the tourism or in the health and food services industry, which has been really impacted by COVID. So really, I mean, I encourage you to think outside the box to be able to solve the problem before it really becomes a lawsuit, because as soon as the lawsuit's filed, it will become more of an issue, because you won't just have the eviction to deal with, but you'll have the accruing debt that may be associated with your eviction lawsuit. So one of the things that I encourage you to do is, I mean, it's been said here multiple times that you need to get on this as quickly as possible. Sometimes that's within the realm of possibility, and sometimes it's not, right? If you've taken an additional job or two in order to put food on your table, it's possible that all these agencies are closed by the time you're off work to be able to reach out for help. I would just encourage you to reach out at least once a day to try to find an agency that can give you some sort of assistance. A lot of people do have some sort of intake system that can be done online, that can be done at night. There's email addresses that you can send them a note to when you're off. I got an email from someone this morning at 2:30 in the morning asking for assistance with an eviction. I obviously didn't respond to them at 2:35, but when I, got up this morning and got to work, that's something that I can respond to and assist with. I know Utah Community Action has their staff's email addresses are widely available on their website. If you have the ability to use your email, you can reach out to these people at any given time that you have available. I know there's transportation issues. I know there's all sorts of complications that arise when someone's facing a housing crisis. It's probably not the first crisis to happen. You've probably faced some issue with your job or with childcare, something like that has led to the housing crisis. So we just invite you to reach out as quickly as you can. Even if you don't have an eviction notice, if you anticipate not being able to make rent for September, today is a good day to reach out to Utah Community Action, or one of the legal agencies, People's Legal Aid or Utah Legal Services, to see if you can get even just an email consultation on what your options are. I think that is the best, and each person's going to have a unique situation. So to answer thinking outside the box options, I think the best way to do it is just going to be reaching out as quickly as you can through email or phone or an internet application to get the ball rolling.
Thanks, Jeff. Heather, did you have something you wanted to add to that?
Not so much anything different, just the same thing. I mean, obviously the path funds for rental assistance is obviously, number one, calling 211, calling Utah Community Action, finding out where the money's at, finding out what options and what needs to happen to get that access. And then again, if you don't potentially use a pro bono attorney, Utah Legal Services, myself or anyone, just make sure that you do talk to your landlord, you do get something in writing, you do talk to them and figure out some sort of a pause, even if it's a short-term pause, just to get, for lack of a better term, your ducks in a row. Because it helps, because then you are able to think clearly. You're avoiding maybe the mental chaos that goes along with the panic from the pandemic, and you can actually logically get a plan in motion. Because I think even with some conversations that I've had, it's not so much that they don't know or that they can't get access to the resources. It's just when you're flailing, you're flailing. It's kind of like trying to grab a branch on the way down the cliff. Sometimes you have to have someone reach out and give you a hand, and it's out there. It's helpful. I'm more than willing to do anything I can for anybody that I'm able to work with. And every situation is different, like Jeff said. But it's potential, and there are options. Again, just plan ahead, like he said, as far as not knowing what September's gonna look like. Nobody knows that they're gonna lose their job, for example. Nobody knew there was gonna be a pandemic. But just planning and having that community, like Tara mentioned, community over everything else, it's really a helping hand to just not so much get your rent paid and solve your life, but to actually be stable. And that's one of the things that Utah Community Action does well, is not just stable and here's your rent and here's a payment, but we really try to increase ways to communicate and actually stabilize the tenants. And right now there's a volume and it's hard to stabilize everyone, but just understanding that there's an empowerment there. There's education, aside from just doing mediation, understanding your rights as a tenant, understanding your abilities and rights as a landlord. You have to know exactly what your boundaries and parameters are. And that's another facet that I definitely am very passionate about. So just reach out. Thanks.
Thank you, Heather. So we only have a few minutes left here. I want to kind of start tying this up so that our residents know where they can access resources. So I'm going to take another question or two from Facebook, and then we can start circling back on closing remarks and just making sure that we're clearly articulating where resources are available and what those resources are. We had a question from Brianne on Facebook. What kind of jobs can we create during this time? Brianne, we recommend that you connect with the Department of Workforce Services, who has tools available to assist with determining what kind of jobs are available, helping you with resume building and applying for jobs. So please reach out to DWS. They have caseworkers that can help you navigate the employment options. Real quickly, I know there's been a lot of media attention over the past few days about President Trump's executive orders as it relates to the eviction moratorium. Tara and Heather, can you guys talk a little bit about what we know about the executive order for evictions, and then also the foreclosure moratorium that is in place until I believe the end of August? Let's start with you.
This is Tara. I'd defer to Paul on that question.
Okay, thanks, Tara. President Trump did sign an executive order dealing with housing, but it does not extend any federal eviction moratoriums. It basically directs government agencies to find funding, to find programs to help renters. It's back to my point. we don't solve the problem by hurting landlords, by tying their hands. We solve the problem by helping renters. So all of us, if we know someone who's struggling, the first thing we do is say, sit down, talk with your landlord, work out a payment program. Sit down, look over your personal finances, figure out if there's money that you can find to pay rent, or reach out to friends and family and churches and community organizations. Tap into the government rental assistance available. I mean, come on, $26 million is out there and only $500,000 of it has been tapped into. Yes, it's difficult, meaning you might have an hour or two of processing and sitting down and talking with people, but be patient. It's worth it to get that rent taken care of. So to answer your question, Angela, the measures that the president took really direct the government to find more money to help renters. They do not direct the courts to prohibit landlords from doing evictions, which again, landlords don't want to do evictions. It's not our business. We want to work something out with you. If you can't pay, move out. We're happy to not do an eviction if we can avoid it. The only thing is we can't allow ourselves to be taken advantage of because our families, our investors, our employees rely upon us. And so it's not reasonable for people to think that landlords are just going to stop getting their money. It's just not reasonable. But I hope that answers your question.
It does, yeah, thank you. Heather, do you want to add anything to that?
As far as the executive order?
Yeah.
Yeah, I mean, I was going to defer to Paul as well, or even, yeah, or just referring to Paul as far as the legalities, understanding what the parameters are for the landlords. I think it's confusing. I mean, even when I seen the executive order, I thought, yay, evictions or payroll tax, awesome. It still was even more confusing than it was before. So, with that being said, it's still the same on my standing point, on my soapbox is communicate. The money is out there. It does take some work. And I think truly, and this is always my push as well, whether I'm working with any of the landlord attorneys' offices, it's just a matter of understanding. Like if that case management's in process, and if these folks that are behind, whether it's 1 month arrearages or 5, just understanding that if it's in process, and even as a mediator or even a case manager, the process is happening. I mean, we're moving as fast as we can. We're pushing, we're gathering the things on both ends. Just that understanding and that ability to say this tenant is doing this much, and let's meet in the middle. And so I think a lot of the attorneys are very kind with that, and I appreciate that even on my aspect for the ones that I'm able to work with. But just understanding that the case management's in process. Let's really hold that. The money's coming. The process is there. We're lighting as many fires. The case managers are lighting fires under whoever they need to. It's a process, and just like any other normal eviction prior to the pandemic, it's still going to take a minute. It's a shorter minute now, thank you. Fortunately, the only COVID benefit is it is quicker and faster now, but it still needs that understanding. It's not so much taking advantage of anyone. It's honestly just understanding the process, and I think we're actually getting there through this. And so kudos to everybody that's really came to the table. I think it's a good thing. We just need to get more people in and to have people understand the system better. That's really all I have. Thanks.
Thanks, Heather. So we have just a few minutes left here. I want to make sure that you each get a chance to kind of offer some closing remarks. I want to, again, kind of reiterate some of the points that I've heard here today, which I think at the bottom line is communication early and often. There's resources available. We're going to talk about how to access those here in a minute. Communicate with your landlords. Landlords, if you're selling your building or remodeling your building, understand that we, maybe offer a little bit more flexibilities. Instead of 30 days, maybe you can offer 45 days, knowing that we have a situation here. So just encouraging everybody to work together to keep people in their homes as much as possible, provide leniencies to the extent that you can, and knowing that there's assistance available out there, that we're all in this together, and we're all trying to keep people safe and healthy. So with that, I want to just make sure that directing our Facebook Live folks to the chat, that our team is going to be posting both in English and in Spanish contact information for organizations in Salt Lake City that have rent and mortgage assistance. I encourage you to go to their websites to reach out to those organizations. They have individuals that are able to translate and help get you the assistance you need. Talk to your landlord early and often, letting them know that you are experiencing a financial hardship due to COVID-19 and that you need assistance. If you are a mortgage holder and you're concerned about foreclosure, please reach out to your bank early and often and see what leniencies, what assistance are available to you. I want to give you guys a minute here to talk about your closing remarks, and then what you do if you, let's end on, if you do get evicted, what are the next steps? What do you do there? So with that, I am going to start with Tara, and know that we have 5 minutes. So let's keep our remarks to about a minute each.
Thank you. So I think the first thing somebody needs to do in terms of if they become unemployed, sit down and write your budget out. What are your expenses? Try to figure out how to rob Peter to pay Paul. We have the heat program that can help with utilities. If you have a car payment, reach out to whoever's holding the title. Tell them you've been affected. If food is a big expense, make sure you apply for SNAP. Go to food banks. I mean, try to problem solve every single one. And so you can, pay the rent at the end of the day. Reach out for assistance, dial 211. You may have other issues happening in your household that you can ask for help as well. Whether your spouse is drinking too much, somebody is, mental illness, etc. Reach out and try to get some help. I also want to say, if you go into eviction and it ends up in court, show up in court. It's really important for you to show up. Don't hide from it, because it's only going to get worse. So show up in court when you're asked to show up. If you get through the 3-day pay a vacate. It's so important to be present.
Okay, thank you, Tara. So we've got 3 minutes left. If you want to just offer some closing remarks very quickly.
Thanks. I just want to focus on a couple of things. We advocate for tenants' rights every opportunity that we get. We only represent tenants, and one thing I would like to highlight is, as you go through the process of communicating with your landlord, make sure everything's written down. If you enter into some sort of agreement to defer your rent, or if you are going to make a rent payment late and your landlord has agreed to accept that late, if that's just a verbal agreement, make sure that you follow it up with an email. We usually encourage our clients to say something like, Mr. Landlord or Mrs. Landlord, this is what we talked about today, and this is how I understand our agreement. Is this how you understood it? And just make sure that that agreement is written down in some fashion so that in the future we can hold both parties to it. This is a very trying time, and there have been some additional grants given to agencies to be able to hire more people to help with eviction support. So my office has received a couple grants to be able to hire additional attorneys so that we can provide assistance. I know Utah Legal Services has received the same, and there's agencies all across the state that are just chomping at the bit for you to call them to be able to put you into the right resource. So I invite you to do that. And I realize that it's a rough time for everybody. So please stay positive and just be as diligent as you can, as early as you can. And good luck.
Thank you, Jeff. Those are good closing remarks. We have about a minute left here. Paul or Heather, do you have anything to add that hasn't been said?
I would just reiterate, don't freeze. If you're struggling, communicate, reach out. Landlords want to help you. We're in the business of providing housing, not the business of doing evictions. So we're not heartless. We want to find ways to help you, but reach out, communicate, and don't freeze.
Thank you, Paul.
And I just echo that too. Don't freeze. And people always talk about crucial conversations and having that present and getting in front of it. It's just that it's called that because it is crucial. Mobility right now is not an option. If you can do anything to sustain your residents and to just, you know, not so much duck and cover, but just understanding how everyone has to take care of themselves, their families right now, have those conversations. If you need help having those conversations, reach out and document what conversations you do have and make that stick. Do whatever you can to make that stick. Thank you.
Yeah. So I'd like to thank our panelists for joining us here today and sharing their expertise with us. We know these are very, very, very trying times. We encourage you to communicate often, reach out for assistance, know that there's people in the community that are able to help you. Please reach out for assistance early and often so you don't end up with thousands of dollars of back rent and fees and fines. We have amazing community partners here that are able to help you. There's funding being infused into the community from the city, the state, the county, the feds. Please, please seek assistance early and often and communicate. Thank you so much for joining us today. We really appreciate your time and we really appreciate the dialogue between the panelists and from our residents here in Salt Lake City. Have a great day, stay safe and stay healthy.